Okay, good afternoon. I hope you guys enjoyed your lunch. For the breakout session this afternoon, we are talking about the topic of the role of professional judgment and client values, preferences and context in evidence-based practices. It's a tutorial, and it'll be done by Dr. Trina Spencer. And not only is she my mentor, but she is also the Director of Research at the Institute for Human Development here. And she got her PhD at Utah State University in developmental disabilities with an emphasis in research or in language development. So, though she has a broad range of interests and experiences, her current research involves the development and validation of language and literacy assessment instruments, a tiered intervention program, and social communication interventions for children with autism spectrum disorder. So, it's my pleasure to introduce Trina Spencer.
It just struck me how odd it was to be a presenter at your own conference. The other thing that's really odd is I'm not used to standing behind one of these, but they're filming, and I'm thinking that the setup here might be better if I stay here, right? If I start moving, I'm just gonna let you know I'm gonna move. Okay. So I was really enthused after the discussion that we got started at the keynote session this morning, because this happens to be the topic that I think we're all going, oh, yes, and let's hit this one. Part of that's really exciting, and I'm really glad that we're jazzed about it, but to be honest, we don't have all the solutions. We don't have the answers in this realm, and so I don't feel responsible for having all the answers. But what I do feel is that I have thought about these things for many, many years. Before I was a researcher, I was a practitioner. And I was a school psychologist and a behavior analyst in schools in New York City. And I spent a lot of time liaisoning with teachers and with parents on the behalf of children with developmental disabilities. And so that experience, before becoming a researcher, I feel gives me a different lens than many researchers have. And my husband's a high school teacher, and he said when he went through his university pre-service training, he said, none of my professors have ever been teachers. It's like, don't you see a problem with that? And I'm like, okay, I get it. So when his advice to me when I became a professor or a researcher is that always stay in touch with practice. What's practice got to do with what I do? And I've had the good fortune of being connected with Tim Slocum and another individual named Ronnie Dietrich, who is he runs a nonprofit organization called the Wing Institute out of Berkeley, California, and it's all about evidence-based education. And Ronnie and Tim have been researchers and faculty and administrators for a good portion of their lives. And when we had these conversations about what is evidence-based practice, I kept going, yeah, but we've got practitioners to think about here. And some practitioners are very good at implementing really good practice and selecting good interventions. And then some just haven't been taught, all right? So in other words, there's the ones that already know how to do it, and then there's the ones that haven't been taught yet, right? It's a skill to be developed. So that's kind of the idea that I have with this, and what I'm going to give you today is really just like where I've been and kind of the thoughts I've made on this particular topic. Okay, here's my quick overview. Today we're going to just quickly explore this research to practice gap. And just so you know, I love discussion, and it's not going to bother me one bit. So I welcome a discussion because I feel like that's going to teach me more about this topic than if I just tell you what I know. Then we're going to talk about client values, preferences, and context in more depth. And I have a particular article that I'm going to use as a basis for some of that. I'm going to offer a few recommendations of kind of like where we go, what needs to be done. And also on professional judgment. And also, again, offer a framework for us to at least start talking about. One of the things that's really difficult about these topics is there's very, very little research, very little written about it. So most of what you get here is like whatever I can piece together in terms of what somebody else said, or they're my thoughts, okay? I also have a couple thoughts about ethical guidelines. I don't actually see any behavior analysts, BCBAs in the audience. Are there any? Because this is a CEU approved section, but there's some pieces in it that I'm kind of like lacing throughout, but if none of you are here, I might just skip them, okay? You are? Good for you. Good for you. Okay, all right, I'm gonna touch on them though, a little bit. Okay, so evidence-based practice is a means for narrowing the research to practice gap. Everybody can agree to that? Okay, so what caused this gap? What causes this gap? Because it's still there. What do you guys think? Ah, I like that. Krista says the people doing the research aren't practicing, which I kind of alluded to in my intro there, right? All right, what else? What causes this gap? That's right, practitioners aren't reading the research. Many of them. Okay, what else?
We were actually talking about this on the way in. Things are forever changing. And so the issues that we have now and even the prevalence rate has changed dramatically.
All right, so she's saying that the issues change. And so maybe to elaborate on that, what the practitioners are experiencing now, research might inform in 5 years, but they're dealing with it now, which is why they need alternatives to empirically supported treatments. It takes a long time to get those, and even when you do, they might be issues that were relevant 5 to 10 years ago. So that's good reason. All right, any other thoughts about what causes this research to practice gap? Yeah. Yeah, very good. Can you guys all hear her, or should I repeat that? She's talking about what our professional training is. And some professions train you as practitioners, and some train you as researchers or scientists, and that it's rare to find a profession that trains you in both, like as a scientist practitioner model. Okay, there is such a model that they tons written about this. And actually, a really good paper, I wonder if it's on my reference list, I can't remember exactly, but a really good paper is somebody talking about the scientist practitioner model and about evidence-based practice being the framework for training scientist practitioners. It's a great paper. And I can't say the last name, it's Chowlitz or something like that. But hopefully it's on my reference list. Okay, so here's some. In 1995, Doug Carnine wrote about the research to practice gaps. And he's primarily writing, this content is primarily for researchers. And we know that this is not just a researcher-only problem, or the gap is not just a researcher problem, like we were just saying. But these points that I have on the board, or on this slide here, are really about research, is that that research is not always trustworthy to the practitioner. So in other words, we're talking about the confidence with which the practitioner can have in that evidence. You know, I've heard some say, yeah, it doesn't matter what research says, that doesn't work for me. Okay, so that's a matter of trustworthiness. Usability, demands required to implement. Is it usable? Is the recommendation or the findings of this particular research and this evidence usable to me as a practitioner? So, commenting about the research, it's not very usable. And accessibility, this is a huge one, all right? How easy is it to contact the research recommendations? I discovered very quickly that the researchers, they publish in these top-tier journals, and top-tier really means that other nice researchers are reading this, okay? But what's the point if they're talking to each other and it never gets to the practitioners? So the accessibility is a real obstacle, all right? These are some of the things that Carnine says are creating the research to practice gap. Well, in terms of evidence-based practice, we've made some progress in this area of best available evidence. In trustworthiness, we have seen a noticeable improvement in the quality of the research studies coming out. Journals now have higher standards for what they'll publish and what they'll accept. That's good. There's even articles and journals that set their guidelines. So there's published papers that says, this is what a good research study should have. And there's mechanisms for disseminating that. In addition, funding agencies for researchers, researchers have to get funds to be able to do their studies. And the funding agencies are saying, we're only going to fund research if it's high quality. It's got to have these criteria, these aspects, these designs. That is a huge step forward, that the arena for research quality is raising the bar. And what happens is that it's also raising the bar for the researchers. So they have to meet it if they want to get published and they want to keep their job. Okay, so we've seen some improvements there. Usability. There is more emphasis on research being usable nowadays. Feasibility and usability are key terms. They're like catchphrases in terms of funding. And in a new science called implementation science, which is really just like the last 10 or so years, this idea that we don't just need to know about how it works under these highly controlled circumstances. We need to know something about that intervention when you actually implement it in real life. They use these terms called end users. So end users and end settings. So now IES, which is Institute for Education Sciences, they're one of the best and largest funders for education research in our country. To be able to get grant funds, I know because I've written several of these grants, you have to include the end users from the beginning in your research. In other words, that user, let's say I'm designing something to be done eventually in the Head Start classroom. The Head Start teacher has to be the implementer from the very get-go, okay? And they require that. I just got feedback, and I pulled them in after 6 months, and they said, nope, first month, they want the end user there. And it's all because this feasibility and usability issues are creating obstacles at the end. What traditionally had happened is the research would be conducted in these highly controlled settings and by researchers and by research assistants, and they do a fantastic job and they get whopping effects. But then we expect to get those same effects when a practitioner implements them. Well, guess what? The practitioner's setting is so different. There's IEPs to write, there's additional professional development to do, there's reports, there's team meetings, all sorts of things that make, and I didn't even touch on lots of them. Their kids are different. They may have more kids. So many differences in where it was intended to be applied that now the funders want it done at the beginning. So we can solve these problems early and figure out how to create a program that's going to be effective given these circumstances and these users. So that's kind of exciting. And actually, I'm a behavior analyst. I was trained to be a single subject researcher, a data nerd all the way. And this last year, I was really, really excited and relieved. Where did Mandy go? She just left. But anyway, Mandy and I and my other student, we conducted our first implementation study. And it was a stretch for us because we had to figure out, how do we collect usability and feasibility data from these teachers? You don't just go in and observe, and collect your data sheet. You have to really get some information. So it really stretched us, but it was very exciting for me to try something new. And I understand why, because we learned so many things about what the obstacles are in Head Start classrooms that we would never have known had we gone through all the research and then said, here, try it now. We wouldn't have known. Okay, so accessibility. There are gobs of websites and databases set up nowadays, and their target audience are practitioners or administrators or maybe policymakers, okay? The idea here is that these accessibility tools or this dissemination tools should be accessible to a broader audience, that we should stop talking amongst ourselves as researchers. So some of these are practice guides. So IES has some practice guides. If any of you went to Tim Slocum's presentation on best available evidence, he probably talked about practice guides and how they're kind of a mix of research and some judgment from experts. Research summaries, just like a 1 or 2 page summary of the research and giving you, pal, here's what you do kind of thing. And then briefs. I'm hoping, if you're not already, on our IHD dissemination email list, we send out bridge briefs every quarter. And the idea with these bridge briefs, some are out displayed on the table right there. The idea is to put the big picture into one piece of paper, front and back. Give you a synopsis of this research and what recommendations and how you might integrate that into a decision-making process. And there's lots of these models across the country. So here we have made some progress in terms of best available evidence. The idea and the evidence-based practice movement has really looked at these things carefully and have made some significant improvements. I think Doug Carnine would be happy. These were based on his recommendations in the 90s. All right, but we know that evidence-based practice is more than the best available evidence. And we've made some progress in this area, but we have not made parallel progress in the selection, implementation, and sustainability of empirically supported interventions. All right? If somebody knows otherwise, I would love to hear it, but I haven't seen it, and I cannot find it, and I've searched so much for it. Dietrich and Lewis, they just have a new paper. It's an online first paper, so it's real fresh. They really talk about treatment fidelity as the weak link in our in the whole evidence-based practice model. Right there at implementation, boom, fidelity. All right, we know some about fidelity and implementation, but that if we don't, they find that if we don't get it that solid and the practitioners aren't able to do it with fidelity, they're likely not going to sustain it. So we know little about what to do when the best available evidence is not as high quality as we would like, or as plentiful as we'd like, or relevant to our consumers. And guess what? That's the bulk of it, right there. There are very few empirically supported treatments and interventions that are going to match perfectly with the problem that we need to solve. So here are the areas of need within evidence-based practice. And you could tell that from the conversation that we had, and your question to Tim was perfect. It's like, how do we get this done? You know? Where we struggle is these values, preferences, and contexts. Things that need to be worked out is like, how does culture or personal variables come into play? Also, like the professional and the organization. You know what? There's cultures in organizations, and it's right there that maybe that's the unit that we have to look closer at, because maybe we're putting too much pressure on an individual practitioner, that maybe it's the organization's responsibility, right? For accountability, that's probably where I would look, is in the organization and the professional organization. What about interprofessionalism? And what I mean by that is, like, how are we working with each other, all right? I've said this before. One of the beauties of this conference is that what we do here is about disability disciplines. That's a lot of us, and we're a mixed group, right? My experiences have been, the biggest lessons I've learned are about interprofessionalism, and you're going to hear some of those today, because I really believe that we're not going to be effective for our consumers if we're not working nicely with each other. Okay, so professional judgment. Oh my, this is huge, such a huge area of need. We don't know very much about this. And it's easy for us to just discard it and go like, yeah, that's just, we don't need that, or it gets in the way. But if we continue to neglect it, we won't understand it. So what is it? What is professional judgment, and why do we care? So I believe that professional judgment has so much to do with implementation and sustainability. And what about decision-making as a skill? I was recently at a summit on evidence-based practice that's held every year in Berkeley, California. And it was an amazing experience. The particular content that we were grappling with was professional development, and how do we train teachers or educators. And over and over and over again, everybody said we need more coursework or training on thinking, being analytical. And it comes down to making good judgments. How do we teach our practitioners and professionals to be wise decision makers? Well, first of all, we got to think about this as a skill that we can teach, okay? All right, so I'm going to go on to values, preferences, and context. I need this, though. You'll know, I don't go anywhere without it. Okay. All right, so who's our client or our consumer? So some definitions consider the individual who is the focus of the behavior change, whatever that may be. But there are others who are interested and invested in these outcomes. And they're also critical to the behavior change process. So like parents, other family members, teachers, mentors, colleagues, employers. How about the organization and the society? All right. This is a really great chapter that it's interesting because it gets referenced all the time because it's about the only thing that is written on this topic about contextual fit. And in particular, this chapter talks about the fit of positive behavior interventions into a school climate. It's all about contextual fit, but they do an amazing job, and I believe their points are transferable. And they bring up these things like the values and preferences of the individuals in that community within that school, or that organization. Doesn't have to be just the school. Characteristics of the individuals being served and the intervention agents, like the people who are going to be implementing things. What's the culture of that particular setting? What are the goals? Like what is the system value? And the skills and the barriers to this. There's no reason to assume that an intervention will be effective in all contexts with all consumers. Otherwise, all of our efforts should be in developing empirically supported treatments and interventions, or a list of these things. That's all we would need if we thought they would be effective in every context. But that's just not even reasonable. So context and fit need to be intentionally included in this decision-making process. And again, if we ignore it, we might do it poorly, inadvertently. Okay, really quickly, a historical perspective. There's this great article, came out in 1968, from Bear, Wolf, and Risley. He's talking about like this client, who's important here. It says immediate and important change in behavior that has practical value as determined by the interest which society shows is in the problems. So it's like what we value and what our system and organization, it's about that society and that community. And then in 1978, Wolf expands on these ideas and talks about social validity. Okay, so there are 3 kinds of social validity from this paper. The first one is like a consumer selection of intervention targets. This is often called social meaning, or you'll hear people, is that a socially meaningful effect? All right, or a socially meaningful outcome. So what is valued here? Okay. Consumers' compatibility with the intervention tactics, it's like treatment acceptability. All right, there's been a little bit of work in this area, but we have so far to go. It's like, can we match or make this intervention compatible with this family? And if not, let's find one that is compatible. Okay, it's treatment acceptability. And then consumers' evaluation of the intervention impact. Consumer satisfaction. Did they like that? Did it work for them? Did they get the effect they needed? Okay? All right, you guys have seen the decision-making framework. Oh, I know, I was like trying to figure out why I have that in there. But here's why. Is because those social validity, those 3 points of social validity I was just talking about, it comes in here, selecting, implementing treatments, choosing the tactics that are appropriate for or compatible with the context and community, whether the outcomes are socially meaningful or are they satisfied with it. So it's right here in this particular decision-making framework. Now the first study that it's not actually a study, what it is this paper by Strain, Barton, and Dunlap was in a special issue of Education and Treatment of Children. And this special issue was actually edited by Tim Slocum, myself, and Ronnie Dietrich that I was just telling you about. And when we sat down to sketch out all of the papers, we're like, well, we need a paper that addresses context and values. And we're like, where are we going to find that? Nobody writes on this stuff. Nobody does this kind of work. Well, fortunately, we found one, this group of people, and what they really wrote about were their lessons learned from series of research over decades. I mean, these guys are very well-known researchers. And so they put together a paper about these lessons learned, and these are kind of like their main points, their conclusions. What they do in this paper is delineate the importance of values, preferences, and context for evidence-based practice. And they have this consumer-oriented perspective, which is revealed through their studies, and more importantly, that it was opposed to the conventional wisdom. So the researchers thought this, and what they ended up finding was something different, which was very interesting. And then also they demonstrate that choosing an intervention with prior efficacy data does not ensure effectiveness with the current case. So those are their three big points. Okay, and I'm just going to run through a couple of examples. There's 5 lessons learned in this particular paper. I'm sure it's on my reference list, so you can check them out. So in this first lesson learned, the LEAP program is a development, right there, behavioral skills training for families with young children with autism. And they have a developmental perspective. They've been researching this LEAP program for decades, and it's a pretty strong program. So they have lots of data to collect. So what they're describing in this particular case is that when the clinician is going into the family's home and they're kind of recording and talking to the family about the routines and the skills of the child that they want to work on, what are the behaviors that these families want to work on? Well, the clinicians their perspective was that the parents are going to want to work on self-help skills or communication, because clearly these kids were delayed in those areas. But the families consistently identified completing routines in a timely fashion as their goal, right? All the mothers in the room know exactly what I'm talking about, right? This is a really important thing. And so from the get-go, the clinicians had prior assumptions about what they're going to walk in the door working on. But over time, they said, okay, we got to stop doing that. We got to really talk to them about what they want to work on, all right? Then in their study, in their analysis, they did 2 things. They worked on skills training of the parent, as well as recorded the parent's confidence and comfort in delivering the intervention. So here's what they found with that. See in this little graph here, let's see, this right here is time to complete the particular routine. So remember, that was what the families identified as being the most important. So they did this in minutes, time to complete the routine. And then this is a rating scale of what the parents reported their confidence or their comfort in delivering the intervention. So what they find is that families achieved behavior change long before they reported feeling comfortable. They assumed that their comfort and confidence in delivering the intervention would be tied with the behavior change, but it wasn't. What they did then is use these data and to determine that what they were going to do is continue to support families until they're confident, not just until the behavior had improved. And here's why. It's because if the families aren't continually comfortable, they're not going to continue doing it. You see? So that led to sustainability, as opposed to, oh, behavior's gone, we're doing great, let's move on. You see the difference? And that came through eliciting that information from the families. Okay, another one is a selection of strategies. So, you guys know prevent, teach, reinforce? Who knows this as a strategy? You guys know this? So what this is a really excellent positive behavior intervention strategy, but it's a model for how to do this in schools and in homes, that kind of thing. Here's how it's different than your standard PBIS program, is that there is input from the primary intervention agent throughout every step of the process. It's not somebody saying, this is what we're doing, please do this, carry on, collect some data, I'll look at it later. It's, well, what do you think? What do you think? What do you want to do? What's going to be good for you? And what happens is they get a strategy menu. So they have a list of empirically supported interventions that fall under prevention strategies, same kind of extensive list under teaching strategies and reinforcement strategies. And the only rule is that the intervention agent has to pick at least one from each of those categories. Just pick one thing you're going to do for prevention, pick one thing you're going to do for teaching, and one thing you're going to do for reinforcement. All right? And that you can choose this based on your beliefs about effectiveness, your assessment data, congruence with your preferences, values, and routines. Didn't matter. The choice was up to the intervention agent. So they made the choice about what's going to be a good fit in my context for my particular child that I'm working with. And what they get is a very high teacher attitudes regarding feasibility and efficacy. So they had a score or rating scales from 1 to 5 on 15 items, and they're consistently scoring very high. 4.6 is the mean score. In addition, the fidelity of implementation is 80% of the teachers who were implementing it correctly. So if you let the intervention agent make the choice, you know, here's some that we all know works, they all have research to support it on this list, and the intervention agent picks, it's their choice based on the context that they know really well, you're going to get better fidelity. Okay, so this one's about consumer satisfaction. The Incredible Years is a caregiver training program for young kids. It's been around for a long time, and there's some pretty good research on it. But most of the research is about reducing negative parenting practices. And in this particular one, what they're looking for is they're trying to teach positive parenting practices. So the 4 that they set out to teach parents were responsive play, descriptive praise, limit setting, and appropriate responses to problem behavior. So with their results, the parents only moderately improved their behaviors. Remember, that's the outcome, is the parent behaviors, that's what they were teaching. So they only improved a little bit. But the caregivers actually reported that their children's behavior improved and that they were highly satisfied with the intervention, despite only modest change in their own behavior. And this really puzzled the researchers. And it turned out that satisfied parents were going to continue with the intervention whether they noticed their own behavior change or not. And what eventually happened is that it actually does improve parenting behavior over the long run because they're continuing to implement it. So over time, they continue to strengthen their skills because they're going to do it. So satisfaction might be a precursor to highly trained. See what I mean? Okay, so I have a little bit of a recommendation, and it comes down to this, is that we can use the evidence-based practice decision-making framework to establish reciprocity, and I'm going to tell you more about what I mean by that. But to establish this reciprocity with consumers, with families, and other professionals. And this might be the one strategy, one way for us to start thinking more about integrating this context and values and preferences into our practice, into this decision-making. By the way, you guys have been really quiet. Does anybody want to say anything? Go ahead, I'm going to drink. Okay, all right, I'll keep going. Let's see. Okay, so I have this saying, it's like evidence-based practice can be the glue in the goal, all right? So we know that in evidence-based practice, the decisions are not just ours alone. Like if you're the sole practitioner and it's your responsibility to select an intervention, chances are there's somebody else that needs to help make that decision, whether it be a parent, a family, a consumer, another professional. We should be talking about what are we gonna do here. And that most of the human service fields and organizations have adopted that broad definition that Tim talked about this morning, that's the definition that is being adopted and embraced by most every field, except for education. That's the one that keeps sticking out there. Anyway, the idea here is that this process can be the glue, all right? It can be the thing that we all use to talk and speak a common language. Right? If we understand what that process and that model is, oh, we're talking about best available evidence here. Oh, now we're talking about client values and preferences, all right? And we're all going to use our professional judgment, but here's the basis of this, okay? So it's a way for us to work together even when we come from different perspectives. It's also readily accepted as the goal of a team-based effort, that what we really want are effective outcomes, and we can get there through the evidence-based practice model. Okay, so I like to talk about this posture of culture reciprocity. And the reason why I talk about it is because this is actually how I learned to get along with other people, okay? I have a really good friend that I went to school with. We got our PhDs together, and my doctoral program was in disability disciplines, no surprise. And so what happened was that behavior analysts, educators, VR, voc rehab, and SLPs, speech language pathologists, we all had our classes together. And at first, this is a little challenging. You're just starting to learn, you're like, how do you talk to these people? And you're like talking about a study, and my criteria for research is up here, and somebody's else is down here. And it almost becomes personal. So interestingly, this idea of cultural reciprocity started to be infused in our training, and over time, we just got good at like, okay, well, so what assumption are you talking about here? Or why do you say this? Okay, and then it's about reflective practice and really understanding what it is that is driving my assumptions. Like, why do I believe that? All right, and why do I make this recommendation? So this idea of cultural reciprocity is a process of introspection and inquiry that questions the assumptions of our field, but also of ourselves. It's not a checklist, it's a way of life. It's a way of thinking. Okay? It's an interaction style and a respectful relationship between people who are different than you. And we don't have to be from that culture and know everything about it to be effective to working with somebody. And when I just use that word culture, I actually mean like anything different, not just what we typically discuss, like these people speak a different language. If you're talking a behavior analyst and a speech language pathologist, those are different cultures, and they do speak a different language. So what I'm saying is that you don't have to be from that culture to be able to work effectively with them. Okay, so here's what cultural reciprocity is about. It's like these 4 steps. Essentially, you identify the values that are embedded in your own recommendations. All right, you got to think about, well, why am I doing that? And then you find out whether the family or the individual being served, the other professional, has the same values and assumptions, and if not, how their view differs. It's simply like, well, this is what I think. Tell me about you. Where are we going? What do you consider important, and why? All right. Step 3 is acknowledging and giving explicit respect to any differences that we identify, and fully explaining the basis of our own assumptions. So it's simply explaining, oh, I get it. That's my definition of, one that always comes up is frequency and rate. What's the difference between these? It depends on what your discipline is, how you define that. So I might say, oh, really? Well, over here in this discipline, that's how we define it. Okay, and you define it like that? All right, let's just call it this. You see? And then we work to establish common goals. And in most cases, the common goal is better outcomes for kids or our consumers, our clients, whoever it is we want to see an improvement in. You see me, I'm fidgeting. I want to move, but I'm not sure how to do that in here. Anyway, step 4, through discussion and collaboration, we set about determining the most effective way of adapting these recommendations in consideration of the families or the professionals, whoever it is we're talking about, value system, so that we can accomplish these common goals. Okay, so in this, all parties are engaged in dialogue and we learn from each other. This framework is an excellent framework for working through diversity, and as long as we have the client's best interest in mind. Too often, I've been in these discussions where we spend time defending our own, defending our turf, defending our discipline, defending my own opinions. And sometimes we don't even know that those are my own opinions. So if we put the focus back on the child with that evidence-based practice framework, what's this outcome that we're working towards? We might be able to refocus that context. Okay, so what does this look like with the families? Before making any recommendations or providing any services, we can explicitly offer the evidence-based practice framework as kind of like a model. Here's the glue and the gold. This is what we're gonna do. And we're gonna give everybody an important role, okay? So I've been in an IEP meeting where the family and the teacher and myself are there, and we just say, guess what? Your role is to make sure that we're considering the client, family, and values and preferences. The teacher's role is to filter some of these decisions, because he's got to be the one that implements this. He's going to tell us how it's going to work in this situation. My role is to tell you what the research says about all these practices and interventions that you might be considering. You see? Plain and simple, we just divvy it out, and we say this is what we're going to do, and this is our goal that we're working for. So definitely explain your values and what's important to you and how you would like to work with these families, and find out what they value. Offer recommendations, but do not overly state, what I want to say here is overtly state how you've considered their values. That's a really important piece. You have to actually be explicit and say, you said you wanted blah, blah, blah. All right? Because if you don't do that, they think you're ignoring what they said. Okay? And then, oh, I love this one, bring the evidence. What I mean by that is don't just say, oh yeah, there's this article that like talks about this and they said this. You become distrustful, all right? You keep saying that, people aren't gonna believe you. And sometimes you actually go get the evidence, it's not quite as strong as you thought it was. And then you're not over-representing yourself. So bring the articles with you, bring your summaries, your reference list, whatever you need to, because you're gonna be credible and you're gonna say, it's okay, it's not my opinion, it's this. This is the research, or this is the evidence there. Here, I'm gonna share it with you so you can know it too. You see? Bringing the evidence. Okay, if your recommendation is not accepted or the family chooses to do something different, remind them of the evidence-based practice framework and together map out the sources influencing the decision. So what I'm saying here is like, look at the map, look at that framework and go, okay, well, so what piece do we have? What is research telling us? What's the best available evidence here? All right, what is the client family value? All right, and what's my professional judgment in terms of how I'm integrating these things? Or the professional judgment of everybody sitting at that table. If you kind of map it out very explicitly, it really comes, it takes that personal, my opinion, your opinion out of it, okay? We also should offer to help evaluate the effectiveness of alternative interventions. So establish a monitoring system. This should be done anyway, but let's say you choose something that's not what you wanted to do. Just say, all right, that's great. Let's do some progress monitoring of this, and then we'll reevaluate in a month or so. All right? So you have a way of determining whether it really was effective or not. Also, then it's not a, see, I told you so, it's the data speaking. All right, and then make sure that it's not detrimental to your client, because there are some limits and some gray areas you don't want to go into. Okay, so what would this look like with other professionals? So here's my advice. Learn a foreign language, all right? Read somebody else's journals, understand their theories, and go to their conferences. I just have to say, you guys are all here, and this is nobody's conference except for, you know, we're all here because we work with individuals with disabilities, all right? So that's a good thing. But I also think that there's value to going to a conference that you're totally and completely out of your comfort zone, okay? I'm going to tell you about my SLP buddy that I went to school with. So when we started our PhD program, he despised behavior analysts, despised them. And everybody I knew thought speech-language pathology was unscientific. And so clearly we were at odds, and it was tough. But we spent some years being students together, and we practiced this cultural reciprocity. And at this point, he's a member of the Association for Behavior Analysis, and I'm a member of the American Speech Language Hearing Association, and we continually go to each other's conferences. And people know us, like, oh yeah, that's the SLP Behavior Analyst team there. And we continue to do research together too. The first time I wasn't quite prepared, I wasn't a chameleon yet. The first time I presented my dissertation study at the ASHA convention, and somebody I didn't know at the time walked up to me afterwards and she said, you know, your data gave you away. I was like, oh, okay. I actually think that's a good thing now, because the influence that my research had in the ASHA world was a good thing. They started looking, oh, that's a well-designed multiple baseline study, all right? And then in the ABA world, the behavior analytic world, my colleague spoke on a panel recently, the conference like 2 weeks ago, about multicultural issues. And he actually knows something about that. And he talked about interprofessionalism. So I'm like, there's an opportunity for us to cross-pollinate and to really be productive and synergistic because we're sharing and we're learning a different language. So now, last week I was presenting, and it was to early childhood teachers, mostly special ed and some gen ed preschool teachers. And she's like, are you sure you're not an SLP? You talk about those linguistic structures really well. I said, no, I've just been trained well. I learned a jargon, and it's gotten me a long way. So I just wanted to point out here that what you see on the slide here is that in the Code for Responsible Conduct for Behavior Analysts, it actually says this, that we are responsible for reviewing an appraisal of likely effects of all alternative treatments, including those provided by other disciplines. And because of that, you need to find a passionate, patient, and honest teacher with a password. Because I don't know about you, a lot of these organizations require that you're a member to be able to get access to their journals. Are you guys understanding here? It's like you can't do that unless you've got somebody that gives you some research to read, you know? In many ways, and many of those journals are not accessible to the general public. Some are, but not all. Okay, and then even so, would you know what journals to look in if it's not your discipline? What do you know, what's a good journal or what's a good place to read? Okay, so I really like this idea of committing something together, all right? And for my SLP colleague and I, we can come to an agreement about data. We care, we're gonna look at that. So if the results are what we want, we'll keep going. And then have many reciprocating discussions. We should seek to understand, not just be understood. We should explain the assumptions and the bias behind our recommendations and interventions and make it obvious that our disagreements are philosophical and not personal. It's the only way you can have a long-lasting relationship with somebody who has a very different perspective than you do. You have to take that personal, we disagree, out of this. Any questions? I'm going to move on to professional judgment unless you guys have something to say. It's way too quiet in here. The walls are sound absorbing too, so even if you are making noise, I wouldn't hear it. Okay. All right, so some of this Tim touched on in the keynote, so it's going to be a little bit of a repetition, but they're going to be coming out of my mouth and not his, so they might be different. Anyway, professional judgment is the process by which the best available evidence is applied to the individual cases in specific contexts. This idea of evidence-based practice provides an opportunity for human service fields to better understand the role of professional judgment. And my opinion is we should not neglect it. Right? We don't have the answers and it's not perfect, but if we neglect it, we're going to continue to do it poorly and not understand it. Okay, so here's this framework again. I just want to point out, these are the key responsibilities of practitioners: selecting treatments, adapting treatments, implementing treatments. Starts with a practical question, ends with some sort of positive outcomes. And here's the three contributors: best available evidence, client and context, and then professional judgment, as Tim pointed out, is pervasive. So I'm going to give you a quick example here. My son Hudson engages in seriously dangerous behavior such as climbing houses to get attention. And he thinks it's just so much fun, all right? So here's my practical question. What treatment should I use? What do I do to get this to stop, right? I don't want my son falling off the house because once he's up there, he's running. Okay. So my point here is that I needed to use some professional judgment to determine what it was I wanted to do. Okay, what's my question? What do I want to find out? Okay, here, I might search for a systematic review of some studies on treatments for dangerous behaviors, right? I might look for the research, but that requires some professional judgment. It kind of gets filtered through there. I'm like, okay, now I know what it is I'm going to look for. Like, the function of his behavior is attention and automatic reinforcement because it's fun. Remember, like running on the roof is fun, okay? And in this one, I might find that there's some research on differential reinforcement of other behaviors and a regular routine of replacement behaviors, things that might compete with that automatic reinforcement. Let's find something else that's fun in a similar way, right? But the idea here, though, is that I had to use my professional judgment to get to this point, because I probably had to filter through several studies. And maybe some were relevant to my son, but maybe some were not, because he's a typically developing child. There might have been several studies or reviews about treatments for dangerous behaviors if they were developmentally disabled, all right? But somehow I have to extrapolate from that research what's appropriate for my son, and that requires some professional judgment. Yeah?
I have a question to do that. So when you're looking at best available evidence, that could actually be your team of professionals, though, too, who are contributing their information for best professional. You wouldn't necessarily have to go to journal articles. You could actually go to your team
Okay, so I would say yes, but that is actually where the slippery slope is. Because if let's say you have like, the diagram that Tim used about the certainty of evidence, all right? And there's a range. So up here is this high quality, really trustworthy research, and down here is your expert advisors, okay? And if you start looking for evidence here, you've missed everything that could be above it. So the preference would be to start here and to move down as the evidence is less available, you see? And maybe you find really good evidence in a textbook, all right, or a pamphlet, or something like that, all right? Depends on that, how certain that evidence is going to be and the high quality, because that is exactly where it gets really slippery. If we start thinking about what's like that my own opinion or my own professional opinion, or I really trust this person, so their opinion is what I'm going to call best available evidence, oh, that's a little tricky, okay? Okay, so in terms of adapting this for my particular client, or my son in this case, that we use this idea of differential reinforcement to reinforce something that was incompatible or something other than climbing on houses. So for every day that Hudson does not engage in dangerous behaviors, he earns 30 minutes of a special activity. In addition, he participates in a rock climbing club every week. All right, so this idea of rock climbing, it gives him height, gives him the climbing thing, and he's strapped in with somebody belaying. Whew. Yeah. By the way, I'm not making this up. This is my son. He really does climb houses and everything else that you can imagine. He'll climb any tree, and then like a month later, he'll be asking you to dig slivers out of his feet. Okay, so the idea here is that I adapted it for him. And also, let's see, in the implementation of this, Hudson he can monitor his own. He can take his own data, because he's a typical 9-year-old boy. And if I make him monitor his own data, he might be more invested in this. And then, remember, attention was one of the functions. He can come to his mom and say, "Mom, I want this special activity. Will you play this game with me?" One of the other things that he might want to do is go shoot his bow and arrow at the targets. Yes, this is my son. That's what he wants to do, these things that are exciting and thrilling all the time. But that's okay if it's, properly supervised. And that's a judgment that I'm making, okay? Okay, so here we end with a positive outcome. So I have to use some sort of judgment to determine whether, maybe, one dangerous behavior a week is enough, or if I really needed to get to be 0. Right? Right? 0, right? Exactly. But that's a judgment. Well, what's really important? Some people might be like, yeah, it's okay. In this particular one, I don't think so. The consequence of, a slip of the foot on the roof is deadly, literally. Okay, so the idea here is that there's professional judgment throughout this system, throughout this. So we use professional judgment every day and all day, and these judgments are a necessary part of effective practice. And this pervasiveness suggests that we should be very good at it. I'm not sure we are. Okay, so where does professional judgment come from? There's a lot of people talk about the art of practice, okay? And this idea of professional wisdom, both of these authors talk about it as it's developed through experience. So it's just like this is that anything goes kind of clinical opinion category, that like clinical opinion category, right? And this is where that slippery slope leads to. And so every time I'm using professional judgment, I am not talking about these things. I'm actually talking about something more substantial. And because these definitions of professional judgment, or these views, these perspectives, are vulnerable to bias and errors, a lot of them. And there's research on this. We are not good at making clinical decisions unless we have a stronger basis for making those decisions. It's also too simplistic. It's funny because it's like this construct that nobody can catch, and so they just throw it over in there in the clinical opinion category, right? Well, I'm not that smart, but I'm a little braver than that. I don't want to just ignore it. I want to try to figure it out. What does this really mean? So I think it's too simplistic to think about it like that. And then, of course, most important is it should not override evidence, like true research evidence, right? And that's one of our checks and balances for professional judgment. That's why going to your trusted friend, they might be knowledgeable, but they might be able to tell you where to go find a good evidence, some good research to say one way or the other. Okay, so Tim mentioned this in his keynote, that the APA task force described 8 professional judgment competencies. All right, so formulating the problem, making clinical decisions like implementing treatments, progress monitoring, interpersonal expertise, continuous development of professional skills. So think about all these things that are involved in what we coin professional judgment. Evaluating research evidence. So you don't just learn to evaluate research evidence just by being a practitioner. Years of experience doesn't make you good at that. You see how they're different? You can't learn this type of professional judgment unless there's some additional training or a mechanism that's going on there. So understanding the influence of context on treatment, and utilizing available resources, and having a cogent rationale for treatment. I love that one. That one is my favorite, my absolute favorite, because it's pointing us in the direction of accountability. All right? It doesn't solve it, but it does point us in that direction. That if we are responsible for making and laying out all of the things that went into the decision or the judgment that you're making, we become more accountable just by saying that. These are the reasons that I am making this choice or making this recommendation, okay? So the thing about this list of 8 is it reveals how complex this really is, okay? The other thing, sorry, I'm not ready for my recommendation yet, is so it is not as simplistic as the previous slide would have suggested. It is more complex, and that potentially there's something there that we can teach. This list, these are actual, to some degree, some of these items are behaviors that we can teach. Okay? Okay, so here's the recommendation. We can establish a scientific basis for professional judgment and commit to teaching or learning professional judgment skills. Like, these are skills. Even though they're nebulous and we can't quite grab a hold of that construct, I see them as skills. Okay, so professionals can draw from the available evidence to strengthen professional judgments and have a scientific basis. So this scientific basis is in the form of principles of learning and behavior. So these are kind of like the nuts and bolts of why things work. All right? It's the science that tells us and explains behavior and behavior processes or change processes. We also have ongoing progress monitoring. That is, in essence, a form of evidence. Okay, we'll talk more about that in a second. So if anybody has ever done a functional assessment, you always identify your problem behavior, and then you replace it, right? You gotta identify your replacement behavior too, right? So I got that one for professional judgment. I don't wanna see any more personal opinion professional judgment. I wanna see a data-based professional judgment. And say, these are the data that support or lead me to making this judgment. Yes, there's judgment involved, but it's not anything goes, and it's not just whatever. So, principles of behavior that are grounded in experimental and applied research serve as a foundation for making these professional judgments. I used to work a lot with parents in New York, and I'm doing this coaching and telling them how to do this with a kid, and the mother turns around to me and she goes, "How do you know that? How do you know what I'm supposed to do right now?" And I stopped in my tracks and I went, So then I had to make a list of all the principles that led into that recommendation for her. And I actually did this exercise. I created the list of the principles that I was doing. I'm thinking about schedules of reinforcement, discrimination, generalization. These are behavior analytic things, but these were principles of behavior. And then I said, guess what? I don't need to teach her how to do that thing. I need to teach her these. And she said, I need to know that. I need to know how you know that. And I'm like, you're exactly right. So I clearly did not come across this myself. Parents, she says, I need to know how to make those judgments on my own. And then what I did as a result of this, I created a parent curriculum that's all about these principles. was awesome. I used it for the next, 5 years working with families. It was fun because the teacher or the parents taught me something about how to be a good teacher. So as professionals, we can identify the principles that contribute to the specific decisions we make, right? And sometimes we're not used to doing that, but we can do that, right? We can think about things like active student responding. We know that's a really critical component of good instruction, right? That's an active ingredient on anything that works. Rapid pace, we know that if we go quickly, the kids have less time to engage in problem behaviors, I get this one all the time. We deliver a trial, and I'm over here collecting my data, writing my data. I come back for another trial, and I spend 5 more minutes trying to get the kids' attention back. I'm like, really? Really? We got to go faster. You got to be delivering that intervention and those instructional trials quickly so you can retain that kid's attention. You're going to get a lot more done, right? Not that the data is bad. You got to figure out a mechanism to be able to collect some meaningful data that doesn't interfere in your intervention. But that rapid pace, if it is a principle and you acknowledge it, then doing this is slowing you down and that this is a problem. Differential reinforcement, contingent and corrective feedback, systematic scaffolding, prompt fading, these are all some principles that if we acknowledge that that's what makes interventions work, these are the things. These are the active ingredients. And we can identify them. This is why. The other good thing about it is there's actually research to support these things. That we don't have to look at a packaged intervention, something deemed empirically supported treatment. We can actually look at the research on differential reinforcement. Guess what? There's actually a systematic review on this. All right? There's also systematic reviews on corrective feedback and rapid pace, active student responding. These are things we actually have decades of research about. So that's a level of evidence that IES doesn't necessarily look at. And maybe it's not this really top one, this packaged intervention, but these elements and these pieces of it have a research base. And that's probably better than asking your trusted friend. Okay, so most of our decisions can and should be informed by close continual contact with relevant outcome data. This doesn't mean that we do not use professional judgment. It means that our professional judgments are data-based. Right? We hear about data-based decision-making, and I love that phrase. I really do. But that essentially, to me, is professional judgment. So we also know that progress monitoring is the best evidence of what works with a specific individual in a specific context, regardless of the strength of the empirical research. Okay? So you take it from the research literature, and then you apply it over here. If you don't have progress monitoring data, you don't know if you've actually done evidence-based practice or not. Okay, you need that outcome with that particular client, that implementation of it. And that model, remember, it ends with a specific outcome. If you don't have that, then it's not truly evidence-based practice. Really, it's just selecting off of a list of treatments. Okay, so given professional judgment is ubiquitous, necessary, and can have a scientific basis, our fields would be wise to embrace it, develop it, and promote it. We've got to figure out how to do this better. And if we do this, if we simply decide, okay, professional judgment really is a valued part of evidence-based practice, it has implications for how we train and develop professionals. Okay, so let's take a concept here of professionals versus technicians. Is anybody not familiar with this distinction? It's kind of this idea that professionals require some sort of certification or a license, usually advanced training in their domain, their discipline, master's or doctoral degrees. It also requires some sort of field experiences, supervised field experiences, and that these are have licensing requirements are attached to somebody who is a professional. Okay, a technician is often your frontline people, your direct care people who maybe have a bachelor's degree or less, but don't have any specialized training in that area. They don't necessarily have to have supervised field experiences, and there's no license necessarily to do that. Although there are some areas where they give technician licenses. Okay, the difference here is that professional has should have the skills to be a good, wise decision maker. Somebody who judges is able to make good professional judgments. A technician simply implements, delivers, doesn't have the skills to make those professional judgments. Anybody have any comments about that? Yes? All right, what's the problem? Go ahead, elaborate. That's right, right. Okay, so she says we definitely count on them. I'm not, yeah. I mean, this is a real delicate topic, right? It's a very delicate topic. Well, my next slide is actually worse. And I'm like waiting for somebody to say that. Guess where the research to practice gap is the largest? It's in education, and it has to do with this distinction. Are teachers implementers or are they professionals? Okay? And this lady over here mentioned that it's the way we get trained. How the profession is trained determines how they think about things once they're given a problem. All right? Are they trained to be problem solvers or are they trained to be implementers? All right? In many higher education programs, they're training implementers. They're training technicians. Yet, in education today, we need professionals. We need professionals that can make good decisions, okay? So, in education, there is a long history of fundamental disagreements with science. And you'll see it all over in higher education. No, that science thing, no. Teaching is an art, all right? They also, in education programs in higher ed, they get minimal training on empirically supported interventions. And there's actually references to this. I put them in the reference list. I just didn't go into great detail. But, actually, I have the references right here. I'm going to tell you about some of them. Let's see, this Walsh, Glazer, and Wilcox, they do work on higher education, like pre-service training programs, and they surveyed a ton of the programs in the US today, and only 15% of these programs taught empirically supported interventions for reading. 15%. 15%. And I mean, that's in 2006. That same result is found by Reschly, Holdheide, whatever those people's name is. But they found the same for special education. They basically found the same result, is that very few higher education programs are training in empirically supported interventions, okay? Also, you can't find research methods classes in teacher training programs. And if you do, to be honest, I haven't seen them. So I can't even speak to that. And I've been in several universities where what's happening is they're not training on how to decipher and determine the quality of a study or even consume research. I mean, they've got so many other things to worry about. I understand it, but that's not it's not a feature in these programs. Also, there's minimal training in the principles of effective instruction. Right here, Klinger and Baker and Fuchs, they all talk about this as like, that happens when they get into in-service, into the schools. If it's going to happen, it tends to be there. They talk about those real strong principles of effective instruction. But those three articles, they also say that when the teachers know the principles and the active ingredients of an empirically supported intervention or curriculum, they're more likely to adapt it to fit their needs, the context, and the particular kids they're working with, and it's more likely to be sustained. That it's not, if they don't understand the active ingredients of the program, it's not going to result in sustainability. Because the teacher or the clinician doesn't know how to adapt it. They don't know what parts they can adapt and what parts they can't. All right? Does that make any sense? This is a little delicate. This is a little hard because I'm so much a teacher, you know? And like I said, my husband's a teacher. And there's some judgment, and many of them are wise decision makers and good judges, but they're not taught that in their programming, generally speaking. Okay, so professional judgment training and professional development are needed, okay? Professional judgment can be developed and it can be enhanced. We need quality pre-service training and we need supervised field experiences. I just pulled out a couple quotes that I got from that Wing Institute summit not too long ago. So teachers are only as effective as they know how to be, right? If we teach them to be implementers, like here's this curriculum, just go out there and implement it, they're gonna be good at implementing. But if we teach them to be wise decision makers, they're gonna be that. So we can train in effective methods, principles of effective instruction, and how to consume research. I love this one. Thinking for others engenders resentment. This happens in schools all the time, right? You get somebody like maybe a school psych or somebody who thinks they have so much more professional training and they're criticizing the teacher because they're not thinking, all right? But then the teacher doesn't want to be thought for. You know, they don't want somebody else to be thinking for them or told what to do. So there's some like clashing going on there. So obviously I care. I want everybody to be thinkers, you know. I don't want to think for somebody else. I want them to know it themselves. Now, this little quote comes from a friend that Tim and I share. He's the director of special ed. He mentioned it in the keynote. And this is his phrase all the time. My teachers are data rich and decision poor. They got gobs of data and they don't know what to do with it. Data rich, decision poor. Well, we can prevent that, I think. A little optimism. We should train on problem solving, evidence-based decision making, and analytical skills. So I supervise behavior analysts or people who are going to become behavior analysts, and I am constantly asking them to look at data. Well, what do you think you should do here? What are these data telling you to do? Okay, but if I constantly tell them, here's what you should do, and then they learn how to do it, they're not developing analytical skills. Okay, they need to know the analytical skills. And then let's say you have no intervention. What are you going to do for this kid? Pull some principles together and tell me why you're going to do it. You see, that's analytical as opposed to just like, here's a box, it's pretty, try it, you know? Okay, you guys get the point, right? Okay, I am looking at my time. I'm pretty good here. Okay, I'm gonna tell you really quickly about this paper. It's basically an evidence-based practice decision-making example. The idea here is that we have 3 kids, young kids with autism, and the practical question is, well, so should we teach this kid sign language, or should we teach them to communicate through a picture exchange communication system? So it's either picture-based or sign-based, right? That's our question. This is a real legitimate question, and the reason I even wrote this paper is it came up so often when I was in the schools, okay? And to be honest, I was passionate about it because I saw it being done, like the decisions were being made based on a professional's inclination or a professional's choice as opposed to like what was right for that kid. And so when I got to, when I had the time to write and incentive to do that, I was like, okay, we gotta fix this problem. So here's the decision-making steps. So let's say you're a practitioner. What am I gonna do to guide this search? Search for the evidence, evaluate the certainty and relevance of that evidence, consider what's appropriate for the student and the family. What about the teacher and the school? These are important variables, but they're not the only variables, okay? And then integrate this evidence and make a decision. So the premise of this paper, though, is that there are 3 kids, all different, but there's only one body of literature. There's only one set of evidence. So what do we do? All right, so here's what we find. Summary of evidence is that both PECS and sign language had sufficient research to support them as choices for young children with autism. Sign language had more studies suggesting that it leads to vocal speech, and the learner characteristics such as imitation and fine motor skills may be critical to the acquisition of signs. Okay, so there's our summary of research after I've done my lit review, which I did. Okay. All right, so here's Juan. He can imitate fine motor movements. He has limited speech, some vocalizations. He has difficulty with matching and discriminating between pictures, and his parents are willing to try anything. He attends a specialized preschool class with an aide, and there are no barriers in his system for PECS or sign. We've got people who are skilled at doing both, okay? Stephanie, she has no vocal or motor imitation. She generally tantrums or hits others to communicate. Her intellectual abilities are quite low, and she does not match basic objects or pictures. Parents are apprehensive about learning another language, like sign language, and PECS is used with some of her peers in the same classroom. And the school district has a specialized augmentative alternative communication trained speech language pathologist. Right? You see how I'm like building the context for these kids? All right, David, he also has low intellectual abilities, no vocal or motor imitation, does not use speech to communicate, he has minimal social interactions. He can follow one-step directions, and he matches picture to pictures. David's cousin is using sign language. David's cousin also has some disability and uses sign language to communicate. And the parents request that the classroom teach him using sign language. The speech language pathologist and occupational therapist actually believe David is a better candidate for a picture-based assistive device, and that picture, like PECS, would be a step toward building that repertoire so that he could use like an augmentative device. Okay, so you see you've got 3 different kids, they have 3 sets of skills, but the evidence is all the same. Okay, so here's where these are hypothetical selections here. For one, it was sign language. It was a good choice because he had some imitation skills, he was starting to vocalize, and his parents were willing to do it. Stephanie, it was PECS, all right? She had some, I can't remember, good matching skills. The system was all set up for it, and the parents were a little apprehensive about sign language. All right, here's David. The parents and the school team disagreed on what was the better choice for him. So the family wanted sign language, but the staff believed PECS would be better. So what they ended up doing was agree to try the PECS, despite the discussions about the research and that this child actually has a profile that might be better for sign language. So they tried it for 3 months, and then after 3 months, they reconvened to evaluate the progress, taking progress monitoring data the whole time. We want to know, how's he learning with this? So at the 3-month mark, they switched to sign language because he made very little progress. Okay, so obviously the point here is that the evidence is the same, but the outcome for these 3 kids were different based on what we knew about them, and that this all happened through professional judgment. There had to be some negotiation in these things and these decisions to be made. All right? Any questions? Okay, so I have a few comments about ethics and evidence-based practice. The philosophy of an evidence-based practice emphasizes that ethical and evidence considerations are intertwined. Okay, so you probably are familiar with things like informed consent. Okay, they have to be informed of something. Whoever our client or our consumer, the family is, they have to be informed about something. That suggests that there's something to tell them about research or evidence. What are these recommendations? Also, families have a right to choose. Our consumers have a right to choose. That actually implies that they have to have choices presented to them. You see, it's ethical to give them choices. Families and consumers also have the right to effective treatment. That means that they should get the ones, or they should have a choice from the ones that are most likely to be effective. Okay? There's some really good stuff written about that. The last one is do no harm. All right? That's like so ethical, and at the same time, it's very directly related to, well, how do we know when we're doing harm, and how do we know when we're not? Okay? Because there are treatments that have been proven to not be effective or that could be harmful. And unfortunately, some of those still exist in our practices, not ours in this room, but in the world of disability disciplines. So this idea of ethics and evidence, it's essentially transmitted through the professionals in this interaction. These are the ones I'm going to skip. I do just want to say that the behavior analyst, the responsible conduct for behavior analysts has some really good direction about this, but you'd think that this is a group that says absolutely not, you don't make judgments based on professional judgment. Right there, the very first one, scientifically and professionally derived knowledge when making scientific or professional judgments. I love it. I love it when I tell behavior analysts that, because they go, oh, whoops. They're like, oh, guess I better think about that, because they're the first discipline to discard that the professional has something to do with it. They're all about their data. But the truth is, they're making decisions, they're making professional judgments. They just haven't articulated what the basis of their judgments are in some cases. Okay. Oh, I love this one. Look at how it's so clear. Clients have a right to effective treatment based on the research literature and adapted to the individual client. It's clearly stated in the behavior analytic conduct. Modifies the program on the basis of data. So this one right here is like in instances when there's more than one scientifically supported treatment, and what I wish they would say is in the instances when there are no scientifically supported treatments, they don't put that in there, but I feel like it's relevant, then we should consider things like efficiency, cost effectiveness, risks, and side effects of the interventions, client preference, and practitioner experience and training, okay? But here's the kicker. This is the caveat that I want to say, that this doesn't actually have a definition, these conduct, doesn't actually have a definition of scientifically supported in these guidelines. So, I'm sorry, does somebody have a question? Yeah, let's shout out. What amount and type of evidence is sufficient? All right, and actually it took me 2 years to figure out what people meant by scientifically supported. I guess after 2 years of reading in education, the IDEA, I mean, that's in there like 100 times. Do you know how it's defined? Not in any way that's useful. Okay? It's not here either. It's not here either. So we don't have answers to this. Everyone goes, yeah. We know what that means. No, we don't know what that means. And if you think you know what that means, you better ask somebody else because they probably think it means something else. So I love putting that caution in there because like sometimes we're a little too confident in what we think what we've got. All right? And for many practical questions, there is none, not even one treatment with a documented, like through a systematic review, that has high certainty and high relevance. That's the bulk of what we're doing. Okay. I think I'm pretty close. This might be the end. So, Gambrel, she writes so good. She actually writes evidence-based practice stuff for social workers. Okay, some of the best meaty material on this, actually there's hardly any material on client values and professional judgment, but it's going to come from her out of the social work field. So this article in the reference list is worth reading, okay? So what she does here is she talks about the evidence-based in name only. Ignore this column here for just a second. I want you to focus on this one right here, in name only. And I just want you to think nobody has to raise their hand or call out, but if you want to, that's okay. Think about how evidence-based practice is used in your discipline, in your realm, in your organization, and see if any of these are familiar, okay? So, questions focused on are selected by researchers or administrators. The evidentiary status of service programs is hidden or misrepresented. So this is like, these people are saying that they're doing evidence-based practice, but this is what it looks like. Neither line staff nor supervisors have skills or resources required to make evidence-informed decisions. Any of this sounding familiar? Services are purchased based on availability and popularity. I have a good friend who's a salesperson for a publisher. She goes, yeah, evidence is important, but it really has to do with the charisma of the salesperson. I'm like, good to know. Okay, and then clients are involved as uninformed or misinformed participants. All right, I've worked decades with parents, and they always have mixed signals. They rarely get the straight truth, okay? Training programs are selected based on entertainment value and popularity. All right, so maybe we got some of this. All right, now let's look over here. What does it mean to have an evidence-based practice in substance? What does this really look like? Questions researchers focus on come from clients or direct line staff. Wouldn't that be awesome? Like, you're just like saying, amen, right? Yeah. That's actually the reason why I feel so passionate about this topic, is because I was a practitioner that said, I don't have answers to this, and this, and nobody's doing that. I'm going to go do it. I'm going to go answer my questions, you know? The Wing Institute has this fantastic book, and they talk about these interlocking relationships between researchers and practitioners. And it's like a pipe dream. Where does that happen? All right? Let me think. I'm trying to see if what I'm going to say is not so good. So when I arrived to Arizona, I put out an email to as many people as I possibly could, and I said, hey, I want to get like a group together, researchers and practitioners talking about evidence-based practice. I want to know what you guys need, what kind of decisions are facing you. You know, it's been a few years since I've been a practitioner. I want to know. Nobody responded. Not one. Not one. Good thing is some of them are here today. So it's taken me a little time, but the idea here is that there is a relationship to be interlocked. Researchers and practitioners can get along a lot better than we have, all right? And I really invite all of that because I believe that's where we find out what we should be researching, okay? There's no longer, evidence-based practice does not allow people to stay in their ivory towers. Okay. The point here is to get us out in the field and get the practitioners and the researchers talking. All right, gosh, my soapboxes are tall. Okay, how about the evidentiary status of services or programs is clearly described. So when I said bring your evidence, that's what I mean. Be very clear about it, not just, oh yeah, there's some studies on this. No, bring it, show it, prove it, okay? Rigorous criteria are used to evaluate the evidentiary status of services. That's an important one because you guys all probably know this. Evidence-based is just another catchphrase. Oh yeah, that's what research-based used to be, and that's what empirical is. That's what, this is best practices. It's all the same thing. The news is that's not all the same thing, and it really depends on how rigorously the studies used to make those recommendations are appraised. That's the difference right there. Nowadays, in the evidence-based practice world, you take recommendations based on the best, the most certain, and the most relevant research. But you have to appraise that, put it through some sort of filtering process, and it makes a difference on how you're basing the recommendations. Direct line staff and supervisors are provided the training and tools needed for evidence-informed decisions. So it cannot no longer be just your administrators or just your consultant, your PhD consultant telling you or telling you about the research evidence. It should be the direct line folks and the administrators of the organization. Evidentiary status is a key factor in purchasing services. All right. So if you said to the salesperson, I was like, well, I'd like to see your reference list, rather than, look how cute it is, And look, you can put this on the bulletin board. I'm sorry, I kid, but it's true. Clients are fully informed regarding the risks and benefits of recommended services and of alternatives. Sometimes when I'm working with families and I talk about behavior analytic methods, I'm also talking about relationship development and intervention. I'm also talking about, what's pretty common with speech language pathology, stuff like that. And a lot of parents go, wow, you're the first behavior analyst I've ever heard talk about those things. Like, well, it's because you have the right to be informed about these things. Okay, so training programs offered use formats that maximize learning and focus on information, needs, and skills directly related to decisions made by line staff. So I love this because this is my whole point here, is that they're training on making decisions. All right, remember that's a skill. Professional judgment can be a skill, and there can be a basis for it. We just have to learn how to do that. And that's what she's saying here. I love it. And to be honest, I think that's where I should end because it's so awesome. Anybody have any questions or comments? What's our time here? Yep, we're exactly. It's 2:45. Woohoo! Thank you, everybody. You guys listened so well.